She never served. It's a delusion that Colonel Title is nothing but a pathetic scam by a failure so desperate for attention she's lost her mind. My dad pointed at me before 12 jurors, his eyes looking at me like I was absolute trash. Right behind him, my sister smirked, soaking in the twisted joy of watching my own flesh and blood publicly execute me. I had taken bullets. I had carried my bleeding comrades through the jaws of death in nameless classified war zones. The enemy couldn't break me, but the deadliest, most heart-shattering stab came from behind, dealt by my own father. He dragged me to court, determined to strip away my honor, the only thing I had paid for with my own blood, just to protect their fragile elite ego. But I kept my mouth shut. The iron discipline of a soldier. I would rather endure this vile humiliation than open my mouth and betray my classified military oath. They were absolutely certain they had buried me. The judge raised his gavel to end it all, until the courtroom doors groaned open. A 4-star general walked past. My shocked family faced the judge. "Do you know who you're accusing? Before I tell you what happened, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. But only if this story resonates with you. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are." I stood in the suffocating silence of our dining room, watching the cream-colored Yale acceptance letter burn inside the marble fireplace. I was 20 years old. I had just traded a predetermined life of corporate networking for a one-way ticket to Air Force basic training. The flames curled around the heavy bond paper, blackening the blue Yale crest first, then consuming the calligraphy of my full legal name. The ashes lifted and drifted toward the damper, disappearing into the chimney like they never existed. My dad stopped cutting his steak. He slowly put down his silver knife and adjusted his Patek Philippe watch. The ticking of that $50,000 timepiece filled the dead air between us. He stared at me with a look of absolute, unfiltered disgust, and I saw it clearly in his jaw. In the way his nostrils flared, in the rigid set of his shoulders, he was calculating a loss, not mourning a daughter. I was a line item on his personal balance sheet, and I had just depreciated to zero. He had spent over $300,000 grooming me for the Ivy League private tutors test. Prep consultants, a closet full of business casual clothing selected for campus tours. Every cent of it was now curling into ash behind the fireplace screen. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. "People like us don't enlist, Betty. We command those who enlist." His voice carried the icy arrogance of a man who believed money could buy the laws of physics. He set the napkin down, perfectly folded, perfectly controlled, as if the act itself was a reminder of his superiority over everything in this house, including me. He picked his knife back up and resumed cutting his steak with slow, deliberate strokes, dismissing my existence with each slice. My mother sat 3 chairs away, staring at her wine glass. She traced the rim with her index finger, producing a faint, ghostly hum that vibrated through the dining room like a funeral bell ringing underwater. She offered a pathetic silent sigh instead of defending her youngest daughter. She did not look up. She did not open her mouth. That silence was louder than any insult my father could construct. I logged it. A soldier logs everything. She had retreated into her wine glass the same way she retreated from every confrontation in this house, by becoming furniture. Beautiful, expensive, decorative furniture that never took a side and never absorbed a blow meant for someone else. I kept my posture straight, absorbing the psychological blow without breaking eye contact with him. The suffocating smell of expensive roast lamb clung to the back of my throat. The glaring reflection of crystal wine glasses threw fractured light across the ceiling. Everything in this room cost a fortune, and none of it had a pulse. The chandelier above the table was imported from Austria. The dining chairs were upholstered in Italian leather. The table itself was reclaimed oak from a demolished English manor. My dad collected beautiful things. He expected his daughters to be 2 more items on the shelf, polished, positioned, and permanently on display for his investors and country club friends. I realized right then that I was never a daughter to this man. I was an asset he expected to flip for social currency. Madeline, my older, flawlessly manicured sister, leaned across the table. She pulled out a compact mirror and casually reapplied her blood-red lipstick. She did not even look at me when she spoke. "Are you planning to hide your mediocrity in that camouflage trash, pathetic?" She clicked the compact shut with a sharp plastic snap, examined her reflection one final time with a slight tilt of her chin, and returned to her arugula salad as if I had already ceased to exist. She speared a cherry tomato with her fork and chewed slowly, her eyes drifting back to her phone screen, where a notification badge blinked with new follower counts. I noted her insult the way a sniper logs wind-resistance, irrelevant noise from a predictable direction. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a tear. I had memorized the recruitment office address 6 months before I burned that letter. This moment was not a reaction. It was the final step of a plan I'd been building since the day I realized that love in this house was conditional on obedience. I had studied the enlistment requirements in the school library during lunch periods. I had passed my ASVAB in secret. I had spoken to a recruiter at a strip mall office while my parents believed I was at SAT prep. I picked up my duffel bag from the foyer floor. The canvas was rough against my palm, a sharp contrast to the polished mahogany banister my fingers brushed on the way out. I walked through the heavy oak front doors without looking back. The cold air hit my face and I inhaled it like a prisoner tasting freedom for the first time. My dad did not follow me. My mother did not call my name. Madeline did not put down her phone. The front door closed behind me with a soft, heavy click, and the sound of it sealed a chapter I would never reopen voluntarily. Over the next decade, I skipped every gala, every forced holiday photo, and every fake family gathering. I built my own empire out of disciplined hazard pay and silence. I sent no birthday cards. I answered no group texts. I returned no voicemails laced with guilt and decorated with fake maternal concern. My absence became a wound they picked at constantly, but they never understood that my absence was not neglect. It was a perimeter, and I fully understood that maintaining that perimeter only fueled their bitter resentment toward the daughter who dared to leave the plantation. I was 26 when the darkness over Nairobi shattered into a lethal crossfire. It was a black op. Did not exist on paper, and neither did we. Our transport, a stripped-down C-130 with no markings and no tail number, touched down on a dirt strip 40 kilometers outside the city. Red dust swallowed the wheels on contact. The mission briefing was 14 minutes long, delivered in a hangar lit by a single generator-powered floodlight. The extraction window was 6 hours. We had 28 personnel and enough ammunition for a 90-minute sustained firefight. Nobody talked about what happened if the 90 minutes ran out. Communications went dead in the first 10 seconds of contact. The heavy stench of burning rubber and the copper scent of blood filled the suffocating night air. Tracer rounds carved bright orange lines through the pitch-black canopy. The deafening crack of rifle fire overlapped in continuous waves, each burst closer than the last. I tasted adrenaline on my tongue, metallic sharp like biting down on a spent shell casing. The ground shook from a secondary explosion 200 meters east. A fireball rolled upward through the tree line, illuminating the kill zone in a sickening orange wash. General Lewis Carrion, our unit commander, took a high-caliber bullet to the shoulder and collapsed against the shattered fuselage of our transport. His body hit the scorched metal with a dull, wet thud. Blood sprayed across the aluminum paneling in a dark arc. Panic threatened to fracture the squad. I watched two operators freeze, their rifles dipping toward the dirt, their eyes going wide and glassy in the muzzle flash. The chain of command was bleeding out on the ground, and the enemy was closing the perimeter. True military discipline separates the living from the dead. I did not hesitate. I stepped over the debris, grabbed the radio operator by the vest with my left hand, and hauled him behind the engine block. I pressed his back against the metal and pointed at the radio. I issued 3 sharp tactical commands. Short, specific, no room for interpretation. I established a secondary perimeter along the drainage ditch to our east and directed suppressive fire on the enemy flank. The radio operator transmitted my commands with shaking hands. Within 45 seconds, our fire pattern reorganized. The incoming rounds decreased by 60%. The perimeter held. Then I went back for the general. I hoisted General Lewis Carrion onto my back. His warm blood soaked through my uniform, spreading across my shoulder blades and down my spine in a hot, wet sheet. He weighed over 200 pounds with his gear. I carried my commander through a relentless storm of incoming fire. My boots grinding into gravel and broken glass, every step a calculated gamble between a bullet and the next piece of cover. I dragged him behind a concrete retaining wall and dropped to my knees. I applied a pressure bandage with my teeth and one free hand while returning fire with the other. His breathing was ragged, his face pale beneath the camo paint, but his eyes were open and his hand was gripping my forearm. He was alive. That was the only metric that mattered. That night, I made sure not a single soldier under my command was left behind in the dirt. We extracted at 3 a.m., everyone breathing, everyone accounted for. I carried General Carrion onto the extraction bird myself. The crew chief tried to take him from me. I refused to release my grip until his stretcher was locked into the airframe. The doors closed. The rotors screamed. We lifted off and the Nairobi darkness swallowed the landing zone behind us like it had never existed. The reward for surviving the shadow world is total erasure. Upon returning to base, I sat in a sterile briefing room with white walls and a single fluorescent tube buzzing overhead. Two intelligence officers in civilian clothes sat across from me. They did not introduce themselves. They slid a document across the steel table, 16 pages single-spaced, printed on paper, watermarked with classification codes I was not permitted to photograph. I signed a top-level non-disclosure agreement. All records of my special promotion to colonel were sealed in a classified vault. I traded my voice for the safety of my intelligence network. There was no public ceremony. There were no ribbons pinned across my chest for the cameras, no handshake from a senator, no press release, no Instagram post. I signed the paper, pushed the pen back across the table, and walked out carrying the heaviest rank in the Air Force inside a folder I could never open in public. I accepted my new reality. To the civilian world, and specifically to my family, I remained an obscure low-level logistics officer shuffling supply orders at a domestic airbase. The disguise fit like a second skin. I wore it without complaint. 2 Christmases after Nairobi, I returned home for one of the mandatory holiday dinners my mother engineered to maintain the illusion of family unity. I sat at the same dining table where I had burned the Yale letter, the same chandelier, the same Italian leather chairs. My dad carved a turkey with the same silver knife he had used to cut that steak 6 years before. Madeline scrolled through her phone with one hand, showing my mother her latest brand collaboration, a teeth whitening company that paid her $8,000 for a single Instagram post. She held the screen up, tilting it so the light caught the before and after photos, and my mother clapped her hands together like she was watching a child take its first steps. My mother turned to me, her voice dripping with that practiced, sorrowful tone she used when she wanted to cut without leaving visible marks. She reached across the table and patted my hand twice, the kind of patronizing touch that pretended to be affection while delivering a verdict. Betty, what are you actually doing with your life? Because logistics doesn't sound like a career a Howard should be proud of. She tilted her head, waiting for me to crumble. My dad did not even look up from the turkey. He carved another slice and dropped it on his plate. At least Madeline is building something the world can see. He said it the way a man mentions the weather, as if my existence was not even worth the effort of a direct insult. I sat there in plain clothes, swallowing their insults because an active-duty intelligence officer does not break cover to stroke her own ego. The gravy boat passed my hand. I gripped it steady. Not a single tremor. I poured gravy onto mashed potatoes I would not taste and smiled the thin, controlled smile of a woman sitting on a secret that could silence every person at this table. I chose the shadows, and the shadows chose to protect me, even from the people who should have protected me first. I was 32, packing my gear for a new deployment rotation when the process server knocked on my door. I opened it to find a man in a wrinkled gray suit holding a manila envelope at arm's length as if the contents might detonate. He mumbled something about being sorry and handed me the envelope without making eye contact. I unsealed it, standing in the doorway, my duffel bag open on the bed behind me, half packed with desert-weight uniforms. I read the plaintiff's name, my biological father. He was suing me in civil court for fabricating military credentials, impersonating a colonel, and defrauding the family's public trust. The document was 23 pages long, printed on heavy bond paper, filed through his corporate law firm, the same firm that had represented 3 Fortune 500 companies in federal court. He wanted financial damages for the reputational harm my independent life supposedly caused his elite social standing. He intended to legally break me to strip my rank, my savings, and my dignity in a public courtroom where he controlled the narrative. The sharp crease of the subpoena left a paper cut on my index finger. I watched the thin red line bloom across my skin and felt absolutely nothing. I set the envelope on the kitchen counter, zipped my duffel bag shut, and called my deployment commander to request a temporary hold on my rotation orders. I walked into the downtown law office 4 days later for the mandatory mediation session. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a pale clinical wash that made every face look 10 years older. I sat across from my father at a conference table that could seat 14. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit, his cufflinks catching the overhead light platinum engraved with his initials, the same pair he wore to shareholder meetings and charity galas. His eyes were cold, calculating, and completely devoid of paternal warmth. He did not greet me. He did not ask how I was. He did not ask where I had been for the past 12 years. He opened his leather portfolio and began reviewing his attorney's notes, treating me like opposing counsel, not his daughter. I realized instantly that this was never about a misunderstanding. He could not stand the fact that the daughter he labeled a failure now carried herself with an aura of authority and financial autonomy that he could not manipulate. I owned my apartment outright. I owed no debts to any bank, any person, or any family trust. I answered to no civilian. He wanted to drag me through the mud to prove he was right all along, that leaving his kingdom was a catastrophic error. And I deserved to crawl back broken and grateful for the privilege of being owned again. His attorney, a silver-haired man in a three-piece suit with a Yale-class ring on his right hand, slid a heavy legal binder across the table. It hit the wood with a dull, authoritative thud. Inside were printed screenshots from Madeline's social media posts, cherry-picked quotes from family friends, manipulated timelines constructed to make my military career look like a fabrication, and signed affidavits from country club acquaintances who swore under penalty of perjury that they had never seen me in uniform. A coordinated demolition. Every page was a brick in the wall they were building around me. My dad had spent months assembling this portfolio. This was not a lawsuit born from a sudden misunderstanding. This was a siege operation executed with corporate precision. Rebecca, my defense attorney, pulled me into the hallway. She was a public defender in her mid-40s with dark circles under her eyes and a caseload that could fill a filing cabinet. She frantically flipped through my heavily redacted military file, her fingers leaving damp prints on the classification cover sheets. Half the pages were blacked out. Entire sections were replaced with stamps reading, "Classified, do not distribute." "We have to settle. You have no proof. Publicly, you're just a standard logistics officer." She looked at me with genuine pity, believing I was trapped in a delusion so deep that I had actually convinced myself I held a rank that no public document could verify. She advised me to pay the settlement and sign a public apology to end the nightmare. Her voice cracked on the word apology, as if she knew the taste of it was poison but had no other medicine to offer. I squared my shoulders, towering over my attorney's panic. I looked directly into Rebecca's eyes, my voice dropping to a freezing tactical register. "I don't negotiate with those who use blood to blackmail the truth." I held her gaze until she stopped fidgeting, until her pen stopped clicking, until the fluorescent hum above our heads became the loudest sound in the hallway. Then I walked back into the mediation room, stared dead at my father across 14 feet of polished oak, and told him I would see him in court. His left eyelid twitched, a micro-expression. He could not control a hairline crack in the mask of a man who was not accustomed to hearing the word no from anyone, least of all the daughter he had written off a decade ago. The defensive campaign had officially begun. Madeline weaponized her 1 million followers without hesitation. I sat in my minimalist apartment, the blinds drawn, listening to the audio feed of her latest lifestyle podcast through a single earbud. The tinny audio came through the smartphone speaker with a hollow, compressed quality that made her voice sound like it was echoing inside a tin can. She forced a wet, trembling sob into the microphone, the kind of theatrical cry that belonged on a daytime soap opera. And I heard the exact second she manufactured it, a sharp inhale through her nose, a practiced quiver on the exhale. A 3-second pause, perfectly timed for maximum listener sympathy. My sister fabricated this whole act. She's so desperate for attention she bought a uniform and pinned stars on herself. I pity her, she needs psychiatric help. She expertly monetized my destruction. Ad breaks for luxury skincare products ran between her tears. Her engagement metrics spiked 40% that week. Within 48 hours, the digital mob descended. My face was plastered across trashy tabloids and content farms that recycled outrage for clicks. Pundits I'd never met called me a disgrace to the uniform, a stolen valor con artist who was terrorizing her prominent family. Veterans advocacy groups released statements condemning me without conducting a single verification call. My phone vibrated endlessly with death threats from strangers hiding behind cartoon profile pictures and flag emojis. People told me to leak my documents, to post a video defending myself, to scream back at the internet. Comment sections overflowed with armchair prosecutors who had already convicted me without seeing a single piece of evidence. My landlord received calls asking him to evict me. A local news crew parked a van outside my building for 3 days. I ignored them all. Breaking my NDA meant putting my intelligence network and my brothers and sisters in arms in the crosshairs of global syndicates who would pay 7 figures for the names I carried in my head. A soldier who can survive a collapsing building does not crumble because of digital noise. I turned my phone off. I set it face down on the kitchen counter and watched the screen go dark. I locked my door. I drew the blinds tighter until the apartment existed in a permanent twilight. I recognized that reacting to their bait would give them the power they desperately craved. Silence was not weakness. It was the most disciplined form of warfare I knew. The next morning, I called Rebecca from the landline phone mounted on my kitchen wall. She picked up on the first ring, her voice tight with anxiety. She had seen the podcast. She had read the headlines. She had fielded calls from reporters asking for a statement. "Betty, we can structure a 200,000 settlement as a one-time payment, or we add the public apology and negotiate the number down to—" I cut her off before she finished the figure. No settlement, no apology, no negotiation, no public statement. My voice was flat operational, the same tone I used to issue combat directives. The line went quiet for 4 full seconds. I heard her pen stop clicking. "Betty, do you understand what you are walking into?" "I've walked into worse." I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. "And I have the scars hidden under my uniform to prove it." That evening, I pulled my dress blues from the garment bag hanging in my closet. The zipper made a clean metallic hiss as I drew it down. The uniform emerged in pristine condition, dark blue fabric, sharp lines, every seam straight. I spent 3 hours polishing my brass insignia, working the cloth in small deliberate circles until every surface threw back light like a mirror. I pressed each crease with a travel iron, measuring the edges with my thumbnail, ensuring the fold lines were sharp enough to cut paper. I aligned my ribbons using a ruler from my desk drawer, spacing them to regulation standard down to the millimeter. Sometimes keeping a vow of silence is the highest form of command. I would walk into that courthouse, letting my physical presence project the lethal discipline they claimed I lacked. The uniform would speak every word my NDA forbade me to say. I sat at the defendant's table with my spine fused to the back of the wooden chair, my hands flat on the table, surface fingers spread exactly 2 inches apart. I had arrived 45 minutes early. I chose my seat with the precision of a field operator selecting a defensive position back to the wall. Clear sight lines to every entrance, the jury box visible in my peripheral vision without turning my head. I observed my family as they filed in, cataloging their formations, their body language, the sequencing of their coordinated assault. My dad took the stand first. He adjusted his designer cufflinks 1 silver disc at a time, rotating each one a quarter turn as if performing a ritual. He projected the aura of a wounded patriarch forced to discipline a wayward child who had shamed the family name. He placed both hands on the witness rail, gripping it lightly, and leaned forward, locking eyes with the jury as if inviting them into his private grief. He pointed directly at me. "I taught her integrity, but she chose deceit. That colonel title is just the delusion of someone who has never achieved anything in life." His words were laced with toxic venom, but his delivery was smooth, practiced corporate, the same tone he used in boardroom presentations when he was about to gut a competitor. 2 jurors in the front row nodded. 1 woman in the second row tilted her head sympathetically. He had their attention, and he spent it like currency, pausing between sentences to let his manufactured sorrow fill the room. Next came my mother. She clutched a lace handkerchief in her right hand, the same one she kept in her purse for church services and charity luncheons. She deployed her fake, trembling vulnerability to manipulate the jury, dabbing at the corners of her dry eyes every 30 seconds with mechanical precision. She looked at me with manufactured sorrow, her lower lip quivering on cue. She always wanted to outshine Madeline. She plays soldier to hide her own incompetence. She delivered the line softly, almost whispering, forcing the jurors to lean in, creating an intimacy that made her lies feel like confessions whispered between old friends. She dabbed her eyes and steadied her quivering chin. It breaks my heart to see her living in denial. I pray every night for her to come home and get the help she needs. The handkerchief went up. The handkerchief came down. The jury absorbed every calculated gesture. I watched her lie under oath without a single muscle in my jaw twitching. I cataloged her breathing pattern, shallow, accelerated, rehearsed. My heart rate remained at a flat resting 60 beats per minute. I monitored it through the pulse point on my left wrist, pressing 2 fingers against the artery beneath the table where no one could see. I had sat through hostile interrogations in underground bunkers where the stakes were measured in body bags and extraction windows. A civilian courtroom with padded seats and recessed lighting did not register on my threat scale. Not yet. Madeline took the stand last. She wore a black designer dress cut just below the knee, modest enough for the jury, but expensive enough to remind the room who paid her bills. She executed a theatrical heaving sob the moment she sat down, gripping the armrest of the witness chair, until her manicured nails left scratches in the lacquer. She pulled a tissue from her sleeve, pre-positioned, pre-folded, and pressed it to her nose. "Her lies destroyed my career," she wailed, her voice cracking on cue. "I lost brand deals worth 6 figures because of the shame she brought on this family." She pressed the tissue to her nose, steadied herself, and aimed her next words directly at the jury, like a weapon she had rehearsed loading for weeks. "She is a pathetic fraud who needs to be institutionalized for her own safety and for ours. She is unstable, volatile, and completely delusional. She constructed an entire military identity from thin air." The jury leaned in, eating from the palm of her hand. The opposing counsel looked at me with smug satisfaction, his pen tapping against his legal pad in a self-congratulatory rhythm, assuming they had securely nailed my coffin shut. I sat through all 3 testimonies without shifting my weight. The injury did not make me cry. It condensed into absolute freezing detachment. I processed each lie the way I processed enemy intelligence, filed, categorized, tagged with a threat level, and stored for future tactical use. On the battlefield, strangers willingly bled out in the dirt to shield my body. They threw themselves across razor wire so I could advance. They held tourniquets on my wounds with bare hands while bullets cracked overhead. Yet here, in the safety of a civilian courtroom with bottled water and climate control, my own bloodline eagerly dissected me to protect their shallow social standing. The sickening smell of my mother's expensive floral perfume drifted across the aisle and settled on my uniform like a chemical agent. I did not flinch. I kept my eyes locked forward, knowing my silence was unnerving them more than any argument ever could. My dad glanced at me twice during his attorney's closing remarks. He expected tears. He expected a breakdown. He expected the damaged daughter to shatter under the weight of 3 coordinated testimonies and a jury that had already made up its mind. He got granite. It was the night before the final verdict. The plaintiff's lawyer had successfully weaponized my lack of public military records, cornering me against a wall of classified silence. He had paraded witnesses' documents and social media evidence that painted a cohesive picture of a delusional woman pretending to be something she was not. Rebecca had done her best, but her best was a public defender's toolbox against a corporate litigation machine, funded by a man who spent more on his watch collection than most Americans spent on their homes. I sat on the floor of my apartment, my back against the bedroom wall, a tin of black polish open beside my right knee. I methodically buffed the leather of my combat boots, working the brush in slow rhythmic strokes. The swish of the bristles against leather was the only sound in the room. I was preparing to walk into a civilian slaughterhouse, but I refused to arrive looking like a victim. I applied 3 coats of polish, letting each one dry, before starting the next building up the shine, in layers the way I'd been taught at basic training 14 years ago. My laptop sat open on the kitchen counter. A news aggregator refreshed automatically, and a headline from a legal commentary site loaded across the top of the screen in bold black letters. It predicted a guilty verdict based on what it called an overwhelming evidentiary imbalance favoring the plaintiff. The article cited unnamed sources close to the Howard family, who expressed confidence that the case was already won. A legal analyst quoted in the piece called my defense non-existent, and speculated that I would face financial ruin, reputational destruction, and possible criminal referral for fraud. I read every word. I closed the laptop with a slow, deliberate press of the lid. I returned to my boots. My encrypted secure phone vibrated against the hardwood floor just after 10 p.m. The screen cast a harsh blue-white glow across the dark room, illuminating the ceiling in a pale rectangle. I broke protocol and opened the secure network portal, entering my authentication code with steady fingers. A heavily encrypted message materialized on the screen. It was a blurry, unclassified grade photograph taken in the chaotic aftermath of the Nairobi operation. The image was grainy, washed out by muzzle flash, and smoke shot from a helmet-mounted camera at an oblique angle. but the center of the frame was unmistakable. It showed me in a blood-soaked uniform aggressively directing suppressing fire over a makeshift barricade, my left hand gripping the collar of a wounded operator while my right arm held a rifle against my shoulder. My face was streaked with dirt and someone else's blood. My jaw was set. My eyes were locked on a target outside the frame. Beneath the pixelated image, a single sentence was typed from an anonymous squad mate: "She held the line." I stared at those 5 words. A slow razor-thin smirk crossed my face, carrying a profound silent pride that no jury could grant and no judge could revoke. I did not need to print this photo. I did not need a piece of paper to prove to a corrupt room of civilians who I truly was. The people who mattered already knew. The people who bled beside me already testified, not in a courtroom with padded chairs and a stenographer, but in the dirt under fire where truth is measured in tourniquets, ammunition counts, and the number of people who walk out alive. I deleted the message and wiped the device securing the network with a 6-digit lockout code. I set the phone face down on the hardwood and returned to my boots. The leather was flawless now, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the overhead light in a single clean stripe. I placed them at the foot of my bed, aligned with the edge of the frame toes, pointing toward the door. I laid down on top of the covers, still fully dressed, hands folded across my stomach, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow I would face the most ruthless execution of my character with my chin up and my shoulders squared. I slept for a solid 8 hours, my conscience entirely clear, ready to step onto the legal battlefield and face the firing squad. If you have ever been stabbed in the back by the very people sharing your bloodline, please like this video and share your story in the comments. Hit subscribe, because the absolute destruction of my father's fake empire is about to happen right now. The courtroom was standing room only. Every seat in the gallery was occupied. Press photographers lined the back wall, their camera lenses aimed at the defendant's table like rifle scopes trained on a fixed position. Reporters clutched notepads with pens poised ready to transcribe the final act of what they had turned into a regional media spectacle. My father sat at the plaintiff's bench in his best charcoal suit, his posture upright, his hands folded on the table, projecting the calm authority of a man who had already written the verdict in his checkbook. Madeline sat behind him in the first row, her phone angled low in her lap, live streaming to her followers with a caption that read, "Justice Day." My mother dabbed her eyes with the lace handkerchief, performing grief for the cameras with the mechanical consistency of a wind-up toy whose spring never wound down. The judge adjusted his glasses and opened the final session. The plaintiff's attorney buttoned his jacket with one hand and began his closing argument with the smug cadence of a man measuring his victory in billable hours. He described me as a disturbed woman who had fabricated an elaborate military fantasy to mask a lifetime of underachievement and family shame. He gestured toward my father with an open palm, painting him as a heartbroken patriarch who had exhausted every option to save his delusional daughter from herself. I sat at the defendant's table in my immaculate dress blues. My brass insignia caught the overhead fluorescence and threw tiny starbursts of light across the ceiling tiles. Rebecca sat beside me, her legal pad covered in frantic notes and crossed out objections, her knee bouncing under the table at a rate that suggested she had already mentally drafted her post-trial apology to me. She had nothing left. No witness, no evidence, no counter-narrative, no classified file she could unseal. She reached under the table and squeezed my forearm, a gesture of apology, not encouragement. I did not squeeze back. The judge raised his gavel, preparing to finalize the destruction of my life. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom groaned open with violent force. Every head in the room turned. The bailiff stepped back, his hand instinctively dropping to his belt. The noise from the gallery died in an instant, cut off mid-syllable, replaced by the sharp, precise clack of polished dress shoes striking the marble floor. Each step echoed through the courtroom like a round being chambered. The rhythm was military, measured, deliberate, and absolutely unhurried. General Louis Carrion strode down the center aisle. He wore his full-dress uniform, dark blue jacket, gold braid across the shoulder boards, and 4 heavy stars gleaming on each shoulder with the cold authority of a man who answered to the commander-in-chief and no one beneath him. His chest was a wall of service ribbons, each one representing a theater of war that most people in this room could not locate on a map. The scar from the Nairobi bullet was hidden beneath his jacket, but I knew it was there, a raised white line across his left shoulder that matched the bloodstain I had washed out of my own uniform years ago. His jaw was set. His eyes locked on the judge's bench with the same fixed intensity I had seen in Nairobi when he was bleeding out and still issuing orders. He walked straight past my shocked father. He did not glance at him. He did not acknowledge Madeline's gaping mouth or my mother's frozen handkerchief suspended in mid-air between her face and her lap. He approached the bench, stopped exactly 3 feet from the judge's platform, and squared his shoulders with a precision that made the air in the courtroom feel like it had been vacuumed out. Your Honor, I request permission to address this court on a matter of national security. The judge stared at the 4 stars on the general's shoulders. The room was silent enough to hear the court reporters breathing. He removed his glasses, cleaned them slowly with a microfiber cloth he kept in his breast pocket, and granted the request with a single nod. The plaintiff's attorney opened his mouth to object. The judge silenced him with a single raised finger without looking in his direction. The old general took the witness stand. He did not wait for the oath. He did not wait for the clerk to finish administering it. He bypassed protocol, planted both hands on the witness rail, with the authority of a man who had commanded divisions, and aimed his voice like a heavy artillery shell directly at my family's bench. Colonel Betty Howard saved my life and my entire unit under heavy fire. She commands with a brilliance I've rarely seen in my entire military career. Her file is sealed to protect national security, not for you people to drag through the mud. The courtroom completely lost its oxygen. I watched 12 jurors physically recoil in their seats. 2 of them grabbed the armrests of their chairs as if the floor had tilted beneath them. A woman in the back row covered her mouth with both hands. The court reporter's fingers froze above her stenotype suspended in mid-air. Rebecca's pen hit the floor and rolled under the table. She did not pick it up. She sat motionless, her jaw open, her legal pad forgotten. My dad's face drained of blood, turning a sickly ashen gray that started at his temples and spread across his cheekbones like a bruise forming in real time. He gripped the edge of the plaintiff's table so hard his knuckles bruised white against the dark wood. His entire body listed forward as if the physical act of processing the general's words had knocked the scaffolding out from under his spine. His fragile reality was shattering in front of every camera, every reporter, and every juror he had purchased with his reputation. Impossible! He barked, his voice cracking with desperate panic, splitting at the seams like wet cardboard being torn apart. You're covering for her. This girl could never be a commander. Beside him, Madeline leapt to her feet. Her phone clattered to the tile floor, the live stream capturing the ceiling as it spun end over end. Her carefully crafted image of composure and victimhood disintegrated as she shrieked across the courtroom, her voice raw, stripped of all performance, stripped of all the polished inflection her followers had come to expect. It's a lie. She's a nobody. The judge slammed his gavel 3 times. The bailiff stepped toward Madeline with his palm raised. She dropped back into her seat, her chest heaving, her mascara beginning to streak in 2 thin black lines down her cheeks. My mother's handkerchief fell from her fingers and landed on the courtroom floor. She did not pick it up. She stared at General Carrion the way a person stares at a tidal wave too late to run, too stunned to scream, too frozen to do anything but sit and watch the water rise. General Carrion completely ignored their pathetic barking. He did not flinch. He did not turn his head. He stepped down from the witness stand, his shoes striking the marble with the same lethal cadence he had carried down the aisle. He turned his body squarely toward my table, straightened his spine to its full height, and slammed his polished heels together. The sound cracked through the silent courtroom like a rifle bolt locking into place. He raised his right hand in a flawless, razor-sharp military salute. Colonel Howard, the nation owes you a debt of gratitude. I stood up, my spine rigid, my shoulders squared, my chin level. I raised my hand and returned the salute with the same precision I had used 10,000 times before, in rain, in sand, in blood, in silence, in the dark corners of the world, where the only audience was the enemy, and the only applause was the sound of your own heart still beating. My fingers trembled for 1/2 second, not from fear, not from weakness, from the sheer crushing weight of being seen, truly seen by someone who knew exactly what I had sacrificed. In that singular moment, my father's civilian wealth and my sister's fake internet fame were reduced to absolute garbage beneath my boots. The judge slammed his gavel one final time, the sound booming through the courtroom with the finality of a coffin lid closing on every lie my family had told under oath. He immediately dismissed the case with extreme prejudice. He removed his glasses, folded them carefully, placed them on the bench, and then spent 10 agonizing minutes scorching my family from his elevated platform. He condemned their repulsive greed, their coordinated perjury, and their deliberate manipulation of the judicial system to persecute a decorated service member whose record was sealed for the protection of the nation, not for their personal exploitation. He used the word malicious 4 times. He used the word contempt twice. He directed his clerk to file a formal referral for investigation into potential perjury charges against all 3 members of the plaintiff's party. He looked directly at my father while he delivered the final sentence of his ruling, and my father could not hold the judge's gaze. He dropped his eyes to the table surface and stared at his own clenched fists. My dad gripped the edge of his table with both hands, his jaw locked, his breathing shallow and erratic. The charcoal suit that had projected power and control 3 hours ago now hung on him like a costume. Madeline pressed her back against the gallery bench, as if trying to phase through the wood and disappear. Her phone sat face down on the floor where it had landed during her outburst. She did not reach for it. The live stream had captured everything. My mother's theatrical sobbing had finally stopped, replaced by a rigid, wide-eyed paralysis that told me she was doing the math, calculating exactly how much of their public image had just burned to ash on live television and how many charity luncheons and country club dinners it would cost to rebuild. I packed my legal notepad into my briefcase. I clicked the latches shut one at a time, each snap precise and unhurried. I straightened my uniform jacket, ran my thumb along the edge of my collar to confirm it was seated properly, and pushed my chair back from the table. I did not look at them. I walked out of the courtroom doors, stepping into a sea of flashing camera lenses from the very press my sister had summoned to destroy me. The irony was perfect. She had built the stage. I had delivered the performance. I adjusted the lapels of my uniform, walking with precise, measured steps toward the courthouse exit. Footsteps hurried up behind me, uneven, desperate, lacking any cadence or discipline. The sound of expensive leather soles slapping against granite in a frantic, undignified scramble. My dad stepped into my path. He forced a sickeningly fake smile for the surrounding cameras, the kind of smile a man assembles when he knows every shutter click is a permanent record and every angle is a potential front page. He reached out and grabbed my shoulder, his fingers pressing into the fabric of my uniform with a warm, possessive grip, attempting to project the image of a proud patriarch reconciling with his brave daughter for the watching world. The cameras devoured the image. "Betty!" He squeezed my shoulder and leaned in close enough for me to smell his cologne, the same woody $100 scent he had worn at every dinner table where he had belittled me. "I just wanted to test you a little. Now I see you've grown. Our family can." I did not let him finish his pathetic script. I brought my hand up and swatted his arm away with a sharp, violent block, a combat reflex drilled into my muscle memory through a decade of close-quarters training. The force of it broke his grip instantly and sent his hand swinging back toward his own body. The cameras captured his humiliated flinch, his arm recoiling, his smile collapsing into a thin, bloodless line that aged him 10 years in a single frame. I stepped into his personal space, close enough to feel his breath stutter against my chin. My voice came out completely devoid of emotion, flat and surgical, yet carrying lethal intent that only a man standing inches from its source could fully absorb. "You were never my father. You are just a man who failed to control me." His pupils dilated. His Adam's apple bobbed once hard as if he was trying to swallow a stone. He did not speak. He had no script for this. No boardroom playbook. No corporate litigation strategy. He stepped backward, his heel catching on the granite step behind him, and he stumbled just barely before catching himself on the iron railing. The cameras caught that too. Every stumble, every flinch, every crack in the mask. My mother let out a loud theatrical sob behind him, burying her face in her hands. But I heard the construction in it, the practiced intake, the measured exhale, the 3-second hold before the next wave, the same mechanical grief she had deployed on the witness stand. It was a reflex, not an emotion. It was muscle memory from a lifetime of performing distress to manipulate the people around her. Madeline stood paralyzed behind both of them, her phone clutched in her white-knuckled fist. Her jaw clenched so tight she was biting her bottom lip, and a single drop of blood trickled down her chin, staining the collar of her black dress with a dark, spreading dot. I did not waste a single second looking back. I had turned their ambush into a masterclass in tactical defense. I let them draw their bows. I let them fire every poisoned arrow in their quiver. and I let the absolute truth shatter their teeth. I descended the courthouse steps, crossed the sidewalk, and opened the door of my waiting vehicle. I sat in the driver's seat, pulled the door shut, and pressed my palms flat against the steering wheel. I held them there for 10 seconds. Steady, no tremor, no shake. I started the engine, checked my mirrors, and pulled out of the parking space. I drove north entirely free. 6 weeks after the trial, I stood at the podium as a guest instructor at the military academy. The lecture hall was built like an amphitheater, tiered rows of desks descending toward a central stage. The walls lined with framed portraits of decorated officers from every branch and every era, their eyes watching the room from behind glass and oak. The echo of boots on the polished floor preceded every cadet's entrance, each pair striking the tile in near-perfect unison. I looked out over rows of young, disciplined officer candidates. Their uniforms pressed their postures rigid, their eyes locked forward. I observed their micro-expressions, the nervous twitch of a thumb against a pen, the subtle jaw clench of a cadet fighting to stay awake after a 5-mile pre-dawn run, the slight forward lean of the ones who were hungry for something the textbooks could not deliver. I maintained my strict posture and delivered a 60-minute tactical briefing on leadership under sustained psychological pressure. I did not use slides. I did not use notes. I spoke from the scar tissue of lived experience, and every cadet in that room knew the difference between theory and testimony. The toxic circus of the Howard family was permanently locked out of my perimeter. My father's name had not left my mouth in 6 weeks. Madeline's podcast had been quietly deleted from every platform after 3 sponsors pulled their contracts in the wake of the perjury investigation. My mother had not called. I had not noticed. After the lecture hall cleared, one small female cadet lingered near the front row. She stood at the end of the first desk, her fingers gripping the edge of the wooden surface, her knuckles flushed red from the pressure. She kept her eyes glued to the floor, the tile pattern, the scuff marks left by 100 pairs of boots, anything but my face. She wore her uniform correctly, every button in place, every crease aligned, but her body language told a different story. Her shoulders were curled inward, folded around a wound she carried in her chest like a piece of shrapnel, too deep to extract. She confessed in a voice barely above a whisper that her civilian family mocked her enlistment every chance they got. Her older sister constantly called her a worthless failure who would never amount to anything outside their small town. She said her father told her she was wasting her life playing soldier when she could be working at the family hardware store. She said the word worthless, and her chin dropped another inch toward her sternum. I watched her trembling hands and saw an exact reflection of the 20-year-old girl who had burned a Yale letter 12 years ago. The same hunched shoulders, the same downward gaze, the same quiet war between self-doubt and defiance playing out behind eyes that had not yet learned which side to feed. I reached into my chest pocket and pulled out the heavy brass challenge coin General Carrion had given me. The metal was warm from resting against my body. I held it between my thumb and forefinger, letting the overhead light catch the engraved eagle on its face and the Latin inscription running along its rim, and then I pressed it firmly into the center of her palm. I closed her fingers around it one by one until her fist was sealed tight around the weight of everything that coin represented. Don't scream to prove you exist. I ordered, my voice low and commanding, the same register I used to direct fire teams and coordinate extractions. Command yourself. Your silence, your existence is the greatest weapon of mass destruction against those who don't believe in you. She snapped to attention, her spine straightened, her chin lifted. Her tears stopped mid-track, drying on her cheeks in 2 thin, glistening lines. She held the coin against her sternum, pressed it there with both hands, and held my gaze for 3 full seconds without blinking. Then she executed a sharp about-face, her boot heel striking the tile with a clean, decisive crack, and walked out of the lecture hall with the measured, deliberate stride of someone who had just been handed a new operating system. Later that afternoon, I stood alone in the biting wind before the granite memorial wall honoring fallen soldiers. The wall stretched 40 feet across the parade ground, carved with hundreds of names in neat uniform rows. Rank, last name, first name, date of service. I traced the engraved names with my fingertips, feeling the cold, chiseled grooves of each letter beneath my skin. I knew 11 of these names personally. I had carried 4 of them. I'd held pressure on the wounds of 2 others while waiting for extraction helicopters that took too long. I had not lost a family in that courtroom. I had simply purged a domestic insurgency from my ranks. The people who shared my blood had never shared my values. The people who shared my foxhole had never shared my DNA. And the people whose names were carved into this granite had given me something my father's fortune could never buy: the unshakable knowledge that I had earned my place in the world by bleeding for it. I am Colonel Betty Howard. My bloodline wears the uniform and my march continues forward. If my fight for truth resonated with you, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your own battles with toxic relatives below. Sometimes the strongest family you will ever have is the one you build with loyalty, not the one you inherit by accident.